On a frozen Ohio highway, every driver saw the starving K9 chasing a blue sedan. Most of them honked, swerved, and kept going. But Reed Callahan, a retired Navy SEAL, saw something different in the dog's broken run. That German Shepherd was not chasing food, shelter, or a random car. He was following the last scent of a family the whole town had been told to forget. So Reed slowed down, turned on his hazard lights, and made one quiet decision. Before this story ends, tell us where you're watching from. And if Valko's journey moves you, please like and subscribe to help us reach 5,000 subscribers and keep these stories alive. Cedar Rail County, Ohio, had a way of making late winter feel personal. The snow did not fall clean. It came mixed with rain, thin and mean, turning the shoulders of the old highway into gray slush, and the cornfields into miles of broken stalks bent beneath a low white sky. Salt crusted the asphalt. Mud clung to every fence post. The abandoned gas station near mile marker 42 stood with its pumps wrapped in rust, its windows clouded by years of dust, like an old witness that had learned the wisdom of saying nothing. Reed Callahan drove through it all in silence. His pickup was 16 years old, dark green under a permanent skin of road grime, with a heater that worked only when it felt respected and a driver's side wiper that clicked like a nervous metronome. Reed kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting near the gear shift. Not tense, not loose, but ready in the way old soldiers were ready, even when there was no war left to fight. He was 50, tall and broad-shouldered, built with the spare hardness of a man who had earned every ache. His olive drab combat shirt fit close through the chest, the camouflage sleeves darkened by damp at the elbows, the faint horizontal bands around the biceps half hidden beneath a worn field jacket thrown open for comfort. His face was clean-shaven, angular, and weathered by more than wind. The undercut in his dark hair was neat, silver showing at the temples and along the front, like frost that had decided to stay. People in Cedar Rail called him quiet. Some called him standoffish. A few, usually after 2 beers and too much courage, called him haunted. Reed never corrected them. A man could spend half his life explaining himself and still be misunderstood before supper. Silence, at least, did not ask for proof. He had left the Navy years ago, left the teams, the deployments, the rooms where men spoke in acronyms because whole truths were too heavy to fit in ordinary words. He had also left behind the kind of work that paired a man with a dog and asked both to trust each other beyond language. But some things did not discharge when the papers did. Some instincts stayed under the skin, waiting. That afternoon, on the old highway west of Cedar Rail, one of those instincts lifted its head. At first, Reed saw only brake lights ahead. A box truck drifted wide. A woman in a white SUV leaned on her horn. A pickup hauling hay swerved toward the center line, its driver shouting something Reed could not hear through the glass and rain. Then he saw the dog. A German Shepherd was running along the right lane, close enough to the traffic that every passing car became a verdict. The dog was too thin, ribs showing beneath clumps of mud-darkened fur. Its coat had once been yellow and black, maybe handsome in a working dog way, but now the saddle of black across its back was broken by grime, and the yellow along its legs had dulled to the color of old straw. One hind leg faltered with every stride. It nearly fell, caught itself, and lunged forward again. Ahead of it, a dark blue sedan moved in and out of the mist. The dog was chasing that car, not barking at it, not snapping at the tires, not behaving like a stray animal startled into stupidity by traffic. It was tracking. Reed's foot eased off the gas. The sedan accelerated slightly. The dog pushed harder, body low, head forward, eyes fixed on the rear passenger door. Its left ear had a torn notch near the rim, a small V-shaped bite taken from the edge. Its muzzle was silvered, not just with age, but with hardship. It stumbled again, and for 1/6 second, Reed thought the wheels of the hay truck would take it. But the dog twisted away, claws scraping against wet pavement, and kept going. "Damn it," Reed muttered. Not angry, not yet. The horn behind him blared when he slowed. Reed ignored it and flipped on his hazard lights. The amber flashes pulsed against the dirty windshield, steady as a battlefield beacon. He guided his pickup into the lane behind the dog, forcing the cars behind him to slow. More horns answered. Somewhere, a man yelled, "Get that mutt off the road!" Reed watched the dog's gait. Pain in the right rear, exhaustion in the shoulders. Dehydration, most likely. But underneath all of it was discipline. The kind of focus no hunger taught, no winter invented. A starving dog ran toward food. A frightened dog ran away from danger. This dog was running after a memory. As Reed drew closer, he saw something at the dog's neck. A collar, black once, now faded, half buried under wet fur. Tactical webbing. Old. The metal plate had been scratched badly, as if someone had tried to scrape away whatever had been engraved there. Reed felt the world narrow. There were moments in life when the past did not knock. It simply opened the door and walked in with muddy feet. He saw another dog for half a breath. Not this one, not Ohio, not winter. A desert night. A hot wind. A dark shape moving ahead of him through dust, ears forward, body sure. A handler whispering one word and trusting another heartbeat to answer. Reed blinked, and the highway came back, gray and wet and full of people too busy to see a soul bleeding in plain sight. The blue sedan veered toward the abandoned gas station. The dog followed. Reed swung in behind them, gravel crunching under his tires as he left the highway. The gas station lot was a shallow lake of brown slush. Weeds clawed up through cracks in the concrete. One pump leaned slightly, as if tired of standing guard over a business that had died years ago. The sedan stopped near the far pump. The driver's door opened. The man who stepped out was younger than Reed expected, maybe late 30s, thin and twitchy, shoulders tucked up against the weather. He wore a faded navy nylon jacket over a gray hoodie, black work pants, and a baseball cap pulled low. His face was narrow, pale with cold or fear, and his eyes kept flicking from the dog to the highway, then to Reed's pickup. Caleb Dorsey was not the kind of man who looked born evil. He looked like the kind of man who had said yes to one small wrong thing, then another, until wrongness became his employer. Reed did not know his name yet, but he knew the posture. Cornered men wore their guilt before they spoke. The German shepherd staggered toward the rear passenger door, whining deep in its throat. Caleb fumbled in the sedan, pulled out a small plastic grocery bag, and threw something into the snow. Cheap dog food scattered across the concrete. The smell should have mattered. To an animal starving that badly, it should have been a bell rung by God himself. But the dog did not even turn its head. It pressed against the sedan instead, pawing at the rear door, claws scraping the blue paint. Its nose smeared the fogged glass. A sound came out of it then, not quite a bark, not quite a cry. Reed stopped walking. That sound reached him in a place no bullet ever had. It was not hunger. It was not anger. It was recognition. The dog was not chasing the car because it wanted something from the driver. It was chasing because something in that car, or something that had been in that car, belonged to the center of its world. The dog rose weakly on its hind legs and peered through the steamed window, its wounded leg trembling beneath it. Caleb swore under his breath and looked toward Reed. "Everything all right?" Reed called. His voice was calm, almost mild. Caleb flinched anyway. "Dog's crazy," Caleb said. "Been following me for miles." "Funny thing," Reed answered, stepping closer. "Doesn't look crazy." Caleb's hand closed around the sedan doorframe. His gaze dropped to Reed's boots, then his hands, then the old military watch at his wrist. Some men could recognize danger only after it had already introduced itself. "I don't know whose it is," Caleb said. "I tried feeding it." Reed looked at the untouched food melting into the slush. "Didn't seem interested." The dog clawed again at the glass, harder this time, and gave a rasping whine. Its body shook from effort. The collar shifted, revealing part of the scraped metal plate. Reed saw one letter. Maybe a V, maybe nothing. But the sight pulled a decision out of him before a thought could dress it up as caution. He moved toward the dog. Caleb panicked. He dropped into the driver's seat so fast his cap nearly fell off. The engine revved. Reed took 2 quick steps forward, raising one hand, but the sedan lurched backward, tires spitting slush. The German Shepherd stumbled away from the bumper with inches to spare. For a moment, the car's rear plate flashed under a skin of mud. Reed caught only fragments. Ohio plate, dark lettering, the last 2 numbers maybe 7 and 3, or 3 and 8. Mud covered the rest like a deliberate lie. Then the sedan shot toward the highway and vanished into the gray wash of late afternoon. The dog tried to follow. It made it perhaps 20 yards. Its front paws hit the edge of the lot. The hind leg buckled. The whole animal collapsed onto the slushy shoulder, chest heaving, head still lifted toward the direction the sedan had gone. Reed was already moving. "Easy," he said. The dog heard him. One ear twitched. The body stiffened. Even half-starved, even broken down by weather and pain, the old training still lived there. It did not bare its teeth. It did not trust him either. Its eyes, dark amber and clouded at the edges, measured Reed with desperate intelligence. Reed stopped 6 feet away and lowered himself slowly to one knee. No sudden reach, no pitying voice, no baby talk. He had known handlers who made that mistake with working dogs, treating them like sadness wrapped in fur. Dogs like this were not rescued by softness alone. They needed respect first, then help. "You did enough," Reed said quietly. The dog's breathing hitched. Rain ticked on Reed's jacket. Behind him, cars hissed past on the highway, carrying people home to warm kitchens, unpaid bills, television noise, ordinary lives. None of them slowed long enough to ask why a dog with a scraped-off K9 collar had nearly died chasing a blue sedan through a storm. Reed took off his field jacket. The cold bit through his combat shirt at once, but he ignored it. Inch by inch, he eased the jacket over the dog's back. The shepherd trembled, but did not pull away. Its eyes remained fixed on the highway, as if the sedan might return, as if hope were cruel enough to circle back. When Reed slid one hand under the dog's chest, he felt bone where muscle should have been, old scars under the fur. Heat from infection near the injured leg. The collar plate brushed his wrist. This time he saw the name. Not cleanly, not all of it. The metal had been gouged, scarred by a knife or file, but 4 letters remained stubbornly visible beneath the damage. Valko. Reed exhaled through his nose. A name changed things. A stray was a problem to be solved. A name was a door to a life someone had tried to erase. "All right, Valko," Reed said. "Let's get you out of the road." The dog's eyes shifted toward him at the sound of the name. Not much, just enough. Enough to feel like a vow had been accepted. Getting Valko into the truck took patience and most of Reed's strength. The dog weighed less than it should have, but pain made every movement difficult. Reed laid him across the back seat on the jacket, then shut the door gently, as if noise itself might break him. For a moment Reed stood in the rain beside the truck. He looked toward the highway where the blue sedan had disappeared. A smarter man might have called animal control and driven home. A more tired man might have told himself there was nothing useful to do with half a license plate and a dog too weak to stand. But Reed had spent too many years learning the difference between random and wrong. This was wrong. He climbed behind the wheel and turned the heat toward the back seat. The old vents rattled in protest before sending out lukewarm air. "Hang on," he said. Valko lay still, eyes half open, muzzle resting on Reed's jacket. For several miles, the dog barely moved. Reed drove toward the only person in Cedar Rail County he trusted with an animal in that condition. Dr. Helen Rourke, the local veterinarian whose clinic sat near the east edge of town, between a feed store and a shuttered laundromat. The storm thickened. Dusk gathered early, folding the fields into blue shadow. Reed kept his speed steady. At the first intersection past the railroad crossing, Valko made a low sound. Reed glanced in the mirror. The dog had lifted his head. At the next turn, the sound came again, sharper. Valko's front paw scraped weakly against the door panel. His nose pointed toward the right, toward a county road that disappeared between frozen cornfields. Reed slowed, the dog's amber eyes fixed on that road with terrible certainty. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. Reed kept driving straight, and Valko let out a broken whine that seemed to tear more from the heart than the throat. A chill moved through Reed that had nothing to do with the weather. The sedan was gone, the driver was gone, but the trail was not gone. Something out there, some road, some place, some person, still lived in the dog's memory with enough force to pull him back from collapse. Reed reached the clinic just as the last daylight thinned behind the rooftops. He parked crooked near the side entrance and carried Valko inside through the sleet. The bell above the door gave a small, startled ring. Somewhere deeper in the clinic, metal instruments clinked and a woman's voice called that they were closed. Then Helen Rourke stepped into the hall, wiping her hands on a towel. She stopped when she saw Reed holding the German Shepherd. Helen was in dark teal scrubs under a gray cardigan, her brown hair tied low and loose, her face sharpened by a long day and instantly softened by the sight of suffering. She did not waste time on questions. Her eyes went to the dog's ribs, the injured leg, the collar, then to Reed's face. "Exam room," she said. Reed carried Valko in. As Helen cleared the table, Valko opened his eyes once more. He looked not at the clinic, not at the woman reaching for gloves, not even at Reed. He looked toward the door, toward the storm, toward the old highway and the blue sedan that had vanished into it. And Reed, watching that ruined, loyal creature fight sleep as if sleep itself might cost him the trail, understood something with a heaviness that settled under his ribs. Valko had not been abandoned by a story. He was still inside one, and whatever that blue sedan had carried, it had carried the scent of someone Valko loved more than life. Dr. Helen Rourke had stitched dogs that bit, cats that cursed with their whole bodies, and one raccoon that had arrived in a laundry basket with the moral confidence of a bank robber. So when Reed Callahan came through the side door of her clinic carrying a half-frozen German Shepherd, Helen did not gasp. She did not ask whether the dog was friendly. She did not waste breath on the sort of questions people asked when they wanted the world to slow down and become less ugly. She took one look at the animal in Reed's arms and said, "Table, now." The clinic smelled of antiseptic, old coffee, wet towels, and the faint warm musk of frightened animals. A wall clock ticked above a faded poster explaining canine dental disease with unnecessary cheer. Outside, sleet scratched at the windows. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed as if annoyed to be awake after closing. Reed laid the dog down carefully. The German Shepherd tried to lift his head, failed, tried again. Helen saw the effort and softened only in her hands. Her face remained sharp and focused, a narrow, intelligent face framed by dark brown hair tied low at her neck. She wore teal scrubs under a gray cardigan, one sleeve shoved up past the elbow, a small silver paw-shaped pendant slipping briefly from beneath her collar as she leaned over the dog. "Name?" she asked. "Valko," Reed said. "Yours?" "No." That answer made her glance at him, but only for half a second. Reed had known Helen long enough to recognize her style of judgment. She did not pry when blood, fever, or shock were on the table. Questions could wait, infection could not. She touched the dog's gums, checked his eyes, ran careful fingers along ribs, too visible beneath matted fur. Valko's coat had dried in hard patches of mud. Yellow and black showed through, in places like a ruined banner beneath ash. His right hind leg trembled when Helen moved it. A low sound rolled from his chest, more warning than threat. "I know," Helen murmured. "I'd be angry too." Her voice had the dry tenderness of someone who did not believe comfort required lying. Reed stood back, arms loose at his sides, though everything in him wanted to hover. He watched the dog watch Helen. Even starved, even feverish, Valko kept track of her hands, the door, the tray of instruments, Reed's shadow on the wall. It was not the frantic fear of a stray. It was assessment. Old training still stood guard inside that battered body. Helen noticed, too. "Working dog," she said. "Looks that way." "No, not looks. Is." She lifted the collar gently from the wet fur. "Or was." The collar was black tactical webbing, faded almost gray at the edges. The metal plate had been scraped with something sharp, not scratched by accident. Scraped deliberately, repeatedly, as if someone had wanted to remove a past without taking the time to remove the collar itself. Helen narrowed her eyes. "Who does that?" "Someone afraid of a name," Reed said. He had meant the words plainly, but they settled between them with more weight than he intended. Helen gave Valko a mild sedative only after judging the dose twice and warning Reed that the dog was too weak for anything heavy. Valko flinched when the vial came out, not merely at the needle, at the smell. The change was small, but immediate. His ears flattened. His breathing hitched. His eyes moved toward the cabinet where Helen had opened the medication drawer. Reed saw it. Helen saw Reed see it. "That happened in the truck?" she asked. "No." She set the vial down and, without making a production of it, opened the cabinet again. Valko's body tightened. The muscles along his shoulders shivered under the mud-stiff fur. Helen closed the cabinet. "Well," she said quietly, "that's not nothing." She cleaned the wound along his hind leg. The injury was old enough to have gone angry around the edges, new enough to still bleed when touched. Valko endured it with clenched silence. Once, when pain bit too sharply, he turned his head toward Reed, not asking for help exactly, but registering him. A soldier taking note of who was in the room when the blade came out. Reed stepped closer and placed 2 fingers on the edge of the table, not touching the dog, simply offering a point in space that would not move. Valko stared at those fingers. Slowly, his breathing steadied. Helen noticed, but said nothing. That was one of the things Reed respected about her. She did not interrupt a fragile bridge while it was being built. When Valko was bandaged and wrapped in warmed towels, Helen began cutting away the worst mats from his coat. Mud fell in flakes onto the metal table. Beneath it, scars emerged, small ones along the shoulder, a pale seam near the ribs. Old pressure marks where gear had once rested. This dog had not merely survived the wild. He had survived people, systems, orders, weather, hunger, and something colder than all of them. Reed reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a strip of damp cloth. "What's that?" Helen asked. "Picked it up off my sleeve after I got close to the sedan. Might be nothing." He placed it near Valko's nose. The change was instant. Valko's eyes opened wider. His muzzle moved. The dog dragged in one breath, then another, deeper, urgent. He tried to rise, legs slipping under the towels. A broken whine pushed out of him, raw enough that Helen's hand froze above the bandage. Reed pulled the cloth back. Valko followed it with his eyes. Helen took the cloth from Reed using forceps and held it away from the dog, studying the reaction rather than the rag itself. "What did you say the vehicle was?" she asked. "Dark blue sedan, Ohio plates, mud over most of the number. Driver was thin, nervous, navy jacket, gray hoodie." Helen's mouth tightened. Caleb Dorsey? Reed looked at her. You know him? I know of him. Runs transport jobs for Elias Venn's company. The name did not land loudly. It landed like a coin dropped down a deep well. Reed had seen Elias Venn at county functions, always smiling from newspaper clippings taped to diner walls and church bulletin boards. A private medical transport owner. A donor. A man who appeared beside veterans on Memorial Day with one hand over his heart and the other already reaching for the next handshake. Helen did not look impressed by the memory. Venn moves elderly patients, she said. Veterans, too. People who need home care, nursing placement, transport to specialists. Half the county thinks he's a saint because he wears polished shoes in bad weather. And the other half? The other half still needs rides. She moved to a side counter and began labeling samples, but Reed could tell her mind had gone elsewhere. Helen's fingers were steady. Her jaw was not. Valko lay under the towels, eyes fixed on the cloth in Helen's hand. Reed looked down at the collar again. The scraped plate caught the fluorescent light. He tilted it, searching through the damage. "Can you check old records?" he asked. "For the dog?" "For the name." Helen gave him a look. "You brought me a half-dead dog from a highway chase involving a medical transport driver, and now you're asking if I feel like browsing records after closing?" "Yes." She stared at him for one dry second. Then she turned to the computer. "You always were a romantic." The clinic computer took its time waking up, as if it too had moral objections to the weather. Helen searched local records first, then older vaccination notes, then archived county tags from before the clinic upgraded its system. Reed stood behind her, arms folded, watching names scroll past. Valko. The result appeared in a record 7 years old. German Shepherd, male. Former military working dog. Owner, Daniel Mercer. Helen leaned closer. "Daniel Mercer," she said. Reed felt Valko move behind them before he heard him. The dog had lifted his head from the towels, ears uneven, gaze fixed on Helen as if the name itself had crossed the room in a familiar coat. Helen turned slowly. "Daniel," she repeated, softer. Valko gave one low sound. Not a bark, not a whine. Recognition. Reed did not like the feeling that passed through him. It was too close to grief standing up. Helen scrolled further. Daniel Mercer, former combat medic, Cedar Rail County address, wife listed as Mary Ann Mercer. Emergency contact, Lydia Mercer. Then the record stopped. No transfer of care, no new address, no request for records, no note that the dog had died, no note that the owner had surrendered him. Nothing. "That's odd," Helen said. "What's odd?" "People who move with pets usually ask for vaccine records, especially a dog like this. Especially if he was a retired working dog. There'd be paperwork." Maybe they didn't take him. Helen looked at Valko. Then there'd still be a story. She clicked into a county notice attached to Daniel's name. Property transfer, debt settlement, relocation. The language was clean, official, and bloodless. Daniel Mercer and family had left Cedar Rail County after financial hardship and loss of property. Helen read it twice. "Mary Ann was sick," she said. "You knew them?" "Not well. Daniel brought Valko in years ago for a paw injury. He was polite, careful, the kind of man who read every label before giving his dog medication. Mary Ann sent Christmas cookies once after Valko healed." A faint smile passed and vanished. "Lydia was grown by then. I remember Daniel had an old handkerchief with her initials. Said she made it at summer camp, and he'd carried it through 2 deployments because fathers are ridiculous creatures." Reed looked toward Valko. The dog had lowered his head again, but his eyes remained open. "What happened to them?" Reed asked. Helen did not answer quickly. "That's the problem," she said. "Everyone said they left. but I don't remember anyone saying goodbye. By midnight, Valko was stable enough to be moved, though Helen disliked the idea of him leaving the clinic. Reed disliked it too, but the dog had grown restless in a way that no blanket or bowl of water could settle. Every time Reed walked near the door, Valko tried to lift his head. Every time a truck passed outside, his ears shifted toward the sound. Helen watched the pattern and finally said, "He's not going to sleep until you show him you're listening." "His leg's bad." "I didn't say let him run. Put him in the truck, drive slow. If he reacts, note where." Reed studied her. "You're suggesting field work with a patient." "I'm suggesting that dog may be the only witness in this county with a working conscience." The line should have sounded dramatic. From Helen, it sounded like a diagnosis. They wrapped Valko in clean blankets and carried him to Reed's truck. Helen came with them, medical bag at her feet, coat thrown over her scrubs. She had locked the clinic but left one light on, a small square of warmth behind them in the storm. Reed drove the route from the highway again, not fast, not chasing ghosts, just moving through Cedar Rail's wet black roads while Valko lay across the back seat, weak but awake. At the first county road, Valko's ears lifted. At the second, nothing. Near the railroad crossing, he made a thin sound and pushed his nose toward the right side of the truck. Reed turned. Helen marked the road on her phone. The farther they drove, the more the county seemed to empty. The town lights fell away. Frozen cornfields leaned in close. A wooden bridge creaked beneath the pickup. Reed kept one eye on the road and one on the mirror, watching Valko's breathing grow sharper. When they reached the old Mercer farm, Valko tried to rise. The property sat behind a sagging iron gate, chained shut beneath a sign half covered in snow. The farmhouse beyond was dark, its porch roof bowed, its windows blank. Yellow police tape, old and weather-beaten, clung to one fence post like a dead vine. Officially sealed, officially abandoned, officially forgotten. But fresh tire tracks cut through the mud near the gate. Reed parked on the roadside. "Stay with him," he told Helen. "I'm a veterinarian, not furniture." "Helen?" She sighed. "Fine, but if you get shot by a haunted barn, I'm not doing paperwork." Reed almost smiled. Almost. He stepped into the sleet with a flashlight and moved along the fence line. He did not cross onto the property. He did not touch the gate. He stayed where the road shoulder met the ditch, reading the ground the way he had once read dust, sand, broken reeds, loose stones, any small confession the earth gave unwillingly. The tire tracks were new, too new for an abandoned farm. Near the base of the fence, half buried in dirty snow, something pale caught the light. Reed crouched and used a stick to lift it free. A torn hospital bracelet. The plastic was cracked, the print smeared, but 4 letters remained. M-E-R-C. He stood very still. Behind him, Valko barked from inside the truck. It was hoarse, pained, and brief, but the sound rolled across the empty farmyard like a name called into a tomb. Helen opened the rear door before Reed could stop her. She kept one hand on Valko's blanket, preventing him from jumping, but the dog had managed to drag himself upright. His nose pointed toward the fence. His body shook with the effort of not going farther. "There's something else," Helen said. Reed followed her gaze. Caught on a twist of wire along the lower fence was a small square of cloth, stiff with ice. Reed freed it carefully and brought it into the truck's dome light. It was an old handkerchief, cream-colored once, now stained by weather. In one corner, 2 initials had been stitched by an uneven young hand. L.M. Helen's face changed. Not shock. Something worse. Confirmation. "Lydia Mercer," she said. Reed looked from the handkerchief to the dark farmhouse. Valko stretched his neck toward the cloth, sniffed once, and then went utterly still. His eyes did not soften. They sharpened. Some old room inside him had opened, and whatever lived there was not memory alone. It was duty. Reed did not let him out of the truck, not fully. He lifted him down only long enough for the dog's paws to touch the snow near the gate, one arm braced under his chest. Valko lowered his nose to the ground, inhaled, then faced the house. He did not try to run. He did not claw at the gate. He only barked once, a ruined sound aimed at the dark windows, and the effort nearly took his legs from under him. Reed held him up. In that moment, the farm did not feel abandoned. It felt emptied. There was a difference. An abandoned place lost its people through time. An emptied place had them taken. Reed carried Valko back to the truck. Helen sat beside the dog this time, one hand resting near his shoulder, not quite touching unless he allowed it. The handkerchief and bracelet lay in a clean evidence bag on her lap. No one spoke until the clinic light appeared again through the sleet. Back inside, Helen cleaned the reopened edge of Valko's wound and replaced the bandage. The dog finally slept after that, but even in sleep his paws twitched, not as if he were chasing the sedan, but as if he were walking through rooms that no longer held the people they should. Reed sat beside the exam table, the scraped collar plate in his hand. Valko, a name someone had tried to erase with a blade. Daniel Mercer, Mary Ann, Lydia. A family officially moved away, yet leaving behind no farewell, no records, no dog, and now a bracelet in the snow. Helen leaned against the counter, arms folded tight beneath her coat. "You know what I hate about paperwork?" she said. Reed looked up. "It can make a disappearance look tidy." He turned the collar plate over in his palm. The gouges caught the light like little frozen rivers. Outside, the storm pressed against the clinic windows. Inside, the old dog breathed under warm blankets, alive by a margin too narrow to feel like luck. Reed closed his fist around the collar plate. A name erased was not the same as a life ended. Sometimes it only meant the person holding the knife had been afraid someone would remember. By morning, Cedar Rail County had turned the color of dishwater. The storm had thinned, but it had not left. It hung low over the town in a damp gray ceiling, dripping from power lines and the tin awnings of closed shops. Snow lay along the curbs in tired ridges, half white, half brown, the way secrets looked after being stepped over too many times. Reed Callahan stood beside the exam table at Helen Rourke's clinic and watched Valko sleep. The old German shepherd had finally surrendered to exhaustion. His body looked smaller under the clean blankets, not peaceful exactly, but less alone. Helen had changed the bandage on his hind leg before sunrise, muttering at him when he tried to lift his head. "Don't start acting heroic before breakfast," she had told him. "That job is already overstaffed." Valko had blinked at her, solemn as a judge. Now Helen stood at the counter, pouring coffee from a machine that had clearly lost faith in humanity sometime around 2008. She handed Reed a mug without asking if he wanted one. "Drink," she said. "It looks dangerous." "It is. That's how you know it works." Reed took it. The coffee tasted like burnt rope, but it was hot, and heat counted as mercy in Ohio at the end of winter. On the counter between them lay the evidence bag containing the torn medical bracelet and the old handkerchief marked with Lydia Mercer's initials. Beside it sat Valko's collar, cleaned enough for the scraped plate to show its scars. Helen had photographed everything, labeled it, and placed copies of Valko's old clinic record in a folder. She did not call it evidence out loud. Not yet. In a small town, words developed legs. Reed looked toward Valko. "He needs rest." "He needs answers, too," Helen said. "But he's not getting either if you and I keep staring at him like he's going to sit up and dictate a sworn statement." Reed looked at her. Helen pointed at the folder. "There's someone you should talk to. Mavis Bell." "You know her?" "I know the diner." "Everyone knows the diner. That's not the same as knowing Mavis. Helen tucked the folder under one arm. She feeds strays, truckers, widowers, liars, and teenagers who think fries are a food group. If Valko was surviving near the highway, she saw him. Reed glanced back at the sleeping dog. Valko's paws twitched once beneath the blanket, then settled. Helen followed his gaze, and for the first time that morning, her voice lost its edge. "I'll stay with him." Reed did not immediately answer. Helen sighed. "Reed, I have kept alive a goat that ate Christmas lights. I can watch one stubborn German shepherd for an hour." That almost made him smile. Almost. The diner sat beside the old bus stop on the west side of town, where the highway fed into Cedar Rail's main road like a vein reluctantly returning to the heart. Its sign read Mavis's Table, though 2 bulbs had burned out so long ago that at night it became Mav Stle, which, according to local opinion, still described the coffee fairly well. Inside, the air smelled of fried potatoes, old vinyl seats, bacon grease, and cinnamon. A small bell over the door gave a tired jingle as Reed stepped in. 3 men in seed company caps sat at the counter arguing about road salt, as if the county commissioners had personally invented winter to spite them. A young mother cut pancakes into tiny squares for a child wearing dinosaur boots. Near the window, an elderly man slept over a newspaper with one hand still wrapped around his mug. Behind the counter moved Mavis Bell. She was 72 and built like someone the wind had tried and failed to remove from the earth, short, round, steady on her feet. Her silver curls were pinned back with a metal clip, and a cream-colored apron permanently stained by coffee and honest work covered a dark dress and cardigan. Her eyes were pale blue, narrowed not by suspicion alone, but by a lifetime of watching people claim they were fine while bleeding all over the floor. She saw Reed and stopped wiping the counter. "Well," she said, "if it isn't the man who orders black coffee and looks offended when it arrives black." Reed approached. "Morning, Mavis." Morning was 3 hours ago. This is the part of day when decent people either work or complain about working. "Which are you doing?" "Looking for information." "Then you should have ordered pie. Information travels better with pie." She turned, cut a slice of apple pie without asking, and set it on a plate in front of him. The crust looked homemade. The gesture did not. It was a toll. Reed placed Helen's photo of Valko on the counter. Mavis's hand stopped halfway to the coffee pot. The diner did not go silent, not in the dramatic way stories liked. Forks still tapped plates. The griddle still hissed. Someone laughed near the back. But around Mavis the air tightened. "Oh," she said. "Just that. Oh." She picked up the photo with both hands. Reed watched the small change in her face, the way her sharpness folded inward and became grief she had been expecting. "You know him," Reed said. "I fed him." "For how long?" Mavis took a breath through her nose. "Weeks, maybe more. Time gets slippery when a creature keeps almost dying on your doorstep." She slid the photo back, but kept one finger on the corner, as if letting go would be rude. "He started coming round before Christmas. Never in the morning, always near dusk. He'd stand across the road by the bus shelter and watch traffic. First time I saw him, I thought he was waiting for someone to get off the Greyhound, except we haven't had a proper bus stop here since the company decided old people and poor people could teleport." Reed sat on the stool. Mavis poured coffee into a mug and shoved it toward him. He was skin and bones then, too. Not as bad as your picture, but bad enough. I took out meatloaf scraps. He wouldn't come near me, just watch the road, so I left the plate and went inside. He ate? A little, never all of it. That bothered me. Why? A starving dog eats like the world might steal the bowl? That one ate like he was keeping room for a task? The words settled over Reed more heavily than the coffee steam. Mavis reached under the counter and pulled out an old order book with a faded blue cover. It was thick with paper slips, notes, and rubber bands. She opened it, not to orders, but to a page where dates had been written in careful columns. Reed leaned closer. "Those are sightings," she said before he asked. "Don't look at me like that. A woman my age writes things down, or men in uniforms tell her she remembered wrong." There were dates, times, brief notes. Dog near bus shelter. Dog slept by dumpster, left before dawn. Blue car westbound 9:40 p.m. White medical van, no logo. Dog chased road after midnight. Dog refused chicken. Reed tapped the line about the blue car. "How many times?" "Enough." "Same car?" "I'm old, not blind." Mavis shut the book halfway, then opened it again. Dark blue sedan. Mud on it half the time. Man driving looked like a wet cigarette in a baseball cap. "Caleb." "And the white van?" "Ambulance shape? No proper markings. Sometimes followed the sedan. Sometimes came alone." Her mouth tightened. "I asked Sheriff Pike once if we had a new medical service running night transfers. He said Elias Venn had expanded care routes for veterans and shut-ins. Said I shouldn't worry myself." "Did you?" "Of course I worried myself. Worry is the only exercise left that doesn't hurt my knees." She turned a page. Reed saw another name written there. Daniel Mercer. Mavis noticed his eyes move. "You knew Daniel," Reed said. "Knew him enough to know he tipped badly, but apologized beautifully." A sad smile touched her face. "Former medic. Soft voice. Always sat in the third booth, back to the wall. Some habits survive retirement. He brought that dog once, years back, before the county got so gray. Valko sat under the table like he was guarding the president and hoping for bacon." "What did Daniel talk about?" "Medicine, mostly other people's. Folks brought him pill bottles because he could read the labels and explain what the doctor meant without making them feel stupid." Mavis closed the order book and kept her palm on it. Near the end, he got nervous. "End?" "Before he left. Before everyone told me he left." The diner noise seemed to move farther away. Mavis looked toward the window. Outside, a pickup rolled past, tires hissing through slush. "Daniel asked me if I'd noticed older veterans getting moved out of the county," she said. "He said some of them were signing care papers they didn't understand. Power of attorney, property transfers, home care agreements. He didn't say everything. Men like him don't spill fear all over a table. They fold it neat and tuck it under the plate." "And then?" "Then Marianne got worse. Then Lydia was seen crying outside the pharmacy. Then Sheriff Pike told folks the Mercers had debts and private troubles and had gone to stay with family." Mavis's eyes hardened. "No one ever said which family." Reed said nothing. Mavis looked back at him. "I tried to keep Valko one night," she said. "Snow was coming down sideways. I got him into the storage room with roast scraps and a blanket. Locked the door because I thought warmth would convince him to be sensible." "What happened?" "He broke the lower panel." Reed glanced at the blue order book. Mavis's voice lowered. "I found him across the road before dawn, sitting by the bus shelter, facing the highway. Shivering so hard his teeth clicked. He looked at me like I was the fool." A faint humor crossed her face and left. "That dog wasn't waiting for someone who abandoned him," she said. "He was waiting for the thing that took them." Reed felt the sentence enter him and stay there. In the old stories his mother used to read, some dogs guarded gates to the underworld. Some followed hunters through haunted forests. Some sat beside kings after all the king's men fled. Valko, half-starved beside a dying bus stop, had become something quieter and harder to dismiss. A witness no one had asked to testify. Mavis pushed the order book toward Reed. "You didn't get this from me. I'm sitting in front of you." "Then you're imagining things. Happens to men your age." He took a photo of the notes with his phone. Before he stood, Mavis reached across the counter and caught his sleeve. Her grip was small and surprisingly strong. "Reed," she said, and the use of his first name made him still. "Don't walk into Pike's office thinking the badge means safety." He looked at her hand, then her face. "You think he's involved?" "I think there are men who do wrong, and there are men who keep a chair warm while wrong walks past." She released him. Sometimes the second kind smiles better. Sheriff Nolan Pike's office smelled of floor polish, old paper, and the kind of coffee made in large metal urns for public meetings where no one planned to enjoy themselves. The building stood beside the courthouse, brick and square-shouldered, with a flag snapping wetly above the steps. Inside, framed photographs lined the wall. Little League teams, Memorial Day ceremonies, Pike shaking hands with county donors, Pike handing a plaque to Elias Venn beneath a banner that read, "Care for those who served." Reed paused before the photo. Elias Venn looked polished, even in a still image. Silver hair combed back, wool coat immaculate, smile calm and expensive. Pike stood beside him, broad in his brown sheriff uniform, one hand on the plaque, the other resting near his belt as if the county itself hung from it. "Reed Callahan," Pike called from his open office door. "Been a while." Pike was 58, heavy through the middle, but still carrying the shape of an old high school linebacker. His square face had softened at the jaw, and a neat salt-and-pepper mustache sat above a smile practiced enough to seem kind at first glance. His hair was combed carefully to one side. His badge was polished bright. Too bright, Reed thought. Pike waved him in and pointed to a chair. "You want coffee?" "No." "Smart man, it's terrible." The joke was meant to make them old acquaintances instead of two men measuring each other across a desk. Reed sat. Pike folded his hands over a stack of paperwork. On one finger he wore a thick class ring. Every few seconds his thumb touched the edge of his badge, a small, unconscious adjustment. "What can I do for you?" Pike asked. "I found a dog yesterday." "So I heard." The answer came too quickly. Reed let a moment pass. "German Shepherd, retired K9, name's Valko." Pike's expression did not change much. A little tightening near the eyes, maybe. A man closing a drawer inside himself. "Poor thing," Pike said. "Lot of strays in winter." He was chasing Caleb Dorsey's blue sedan. This time Pike leaned back. "Caleb works medical transport. Dogs chase vehicles. Happens. This dog ignored food and tried to get into the rear door." "Reed?" Pike sighed, softening his voice. "You know what trauma does. Animals get confused. People too." There it was. A hand laid gently over the truth's mouth. Reed watched him. "Daniel Mercer owned Valko." Pike's thumb found the badge again. Daniel moved away. "With Marianne and Lydia?" "That was my understanding." "Where?" Pike's smile thinned. "You know I can't hand out private information." "You have it?" "I said I can't hand it out." Reed nodded once. Pike's office window looked out on the parking lot, where sleet stippled the hoods of county vehicles. On the wall behind him hung a framed verse about service, printed in gold letters. Reed wondered how many lies in history had sat beneath noble fonts. "Daniel had a dog," Reed said. "A K9, no transfer record, no surrender, no death note, no vet records requested. Families in debt don't always handle things cleanly." "And the medical bracelet with Mercer's name near the old farm?" Pike's gaze lifted sharply, only for a second. But Reed saw it. "Now, hold on," Pike said. "You were at that property?" "On the public shoulder. That farm is sealed." "Then someone should tell the fresh tire tracks." Pike stood and walked to the window. His boots made soft sounds on the polished floor. For a long moment he looked out without speaking. When he turned back, The friendliness had cooled. "Reed, I respect your service. I do. But you've been back here long enough to know this county has its share of sad stories. Daniel had debts. Marianne was sick. Lydia and her father had problems. People leave. They don't always leave pretty. They didn't take the dog. Maybe they couldn't. Maybe they didn't get the choice." Pike's jaw tightened. "You want advice?" he said. "No." "I'll give it anyway. Don't go digging up something that's already been put to rest." Reed stood slowly. That phrase reached into him and found old bone. Put to rest. He had heard commanders use smoother versions of it. He had heard officials say it after mistakes, after cover stories, after families were handed folded flags and incomplete explanations. Let it rest. Move forward. Nothing to be gained. The dead do not benefit from questions, but it was never the dead who feared questions. It was the living who had signed the forms. Reed looked at Pike. "That dog crawled back from whatever happened to him," he said. "Doesn't look rested to me." Pike's face reddened faintly. "Be careful, Reed." "I usually am." Careful men don't confuse instinct for evidence. Reed walked to the door, then stopped. And careless men confuse silence for peace. He left before Pike could answer. Outside, the cold air felt cleaner, though not kinder. Reed crossed the wet steps toward his truck, the diner's copied notes in his pocket, and Pike's warning still fresh in his ears. A woman's voice came from beside the line of county vehicles. "Callahan?" Reed turned. Deputy Clara Haynes stood near a cruiser with the driver's door open, pretending to check something on the seat. She was in her early 30s, slim and alert, with a brown deputy jacket zipped to her throat and dark hair cut in a blunt bob tucked behind one ear. Her face was young enough that some men would underestimate her and tired enough that they would regret it eventually. She did not come closer. Neither did Reed. "Sheriff know you're talking to me?" he asked. "He knows I talk. He hasn't figured out when to worry." That earned the ghost of a smile from Reed. Clara's eyes moved toward the office window, then back to him. "You mentioned Caleb Dorsey?" "I did." "Blue sedan?" "Yes." She opened a folder just enough for Reed to see a corner of printed forms. "I've seen transport logs that don't line up. Patients signed out at times when the roads were closed. Mileage reports that don't match routes. Elias Venn's company has more night movement than the county admits." "Why tell me?" "Because every time I ask Pike, he tells me I'm young." Her mouth tightened. "And every time an old veteran disappears into a paperwork transfer, somebody tells the family to be grateful." Reed studied her. "Are you helping?" "Not yet." An honest answer. Reed respected it more than a brave lie. Clara closed the folder. "If you keep pulling at Elias Venn, don't just watch the drivers. Drivers get scared and make mistakes. Men in offices clean them up." She looked toward Pike's window again. "And Reed?" He waited. "Be careful around people who wear a badge like a curtain." Then she climbed into the cruiser and drove away, leaving Reed in the sleet with more questions than he had arrived with. For a moment, he stood in the parking lot and listened to the town move around him. Tires on wet pavement, a flag rope clanking against metal. Somewhere down the street, the lunch bell at Mavis's diner chimed as the door opened and closed. Cedar Rail County looked ordinary from there. Brick buildings, slush. A courthouse, a sheriff's office, a diner that smelled like pie. The sort of place where people knew your truck before they knew your heart. But beneath the ordinary lay something organized and patient. Reed looked toward the road that led back to Helen's clinic, where Valko slept under warm blankets, with a scraped name around his neck and a memory no one had managed to kill. Mavis had fed him. Helen had treated him. Clara had warned him. Pike had tried to bury him in advice. And somewhere in the county's gray winter, A blue sedan kept moving through the dark with a secret in its upholstery. Reed got into his truck and started the engine. He did not know yet whether Daniel Mercer was alive. He did not know where Lydia had gone. He did not know how far Elias Venn's reach extended, or how much of the sheriff's smile was fear dressed as authority. But he knew this much. Valko had waited by the highway because every human explanation had failed him, and Reed was done letting humans explain him away. Valko learned to eat again, as if eating were an order he did not entirely trust. The first morning after Reed and Helen returned from the Mercer farm, the old German shepherd only sniffed the bowl Helen placed beside his blanket. Boiled chicken, rice, broth, a little medicine, hidden so poorly that Valko gave her a look of exhausted accusation. Helen planted both hands on her hips. "Don't start. I've been lied to by better patients." Valko blinked once, then took a cautious mouthful. Reed, sitting near the exam room door with his coffee cooling untouched, let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. It was not victory, not even close. But it was the first time since the highway that Valko had chosen something other than the trail. Outside, Cedar Rail County thawed badly. Snow slid from roofs in dirty sheets. Gutters dripped. The town looked less frozen now, but not warmer. Everything seemed exposed, as if the storm had peeled back a layer and left the county standing in its old stains. For 3 days, Reed stayed close to Helen's clinic. He told himself it was because Valko might worsen, because Helen needed help lifting him, because the dog still reacted to passing engines and woke from shallow sleep with his ears stiff and eyes searching the room. All of that was true. It was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that Reed understood the silence after a mission better than he understood ordinary life. The waiting, the cleaning of gear, the small medical tasks, the patient assembling of facts before the next move. In the clinic, he could be useful without explaining himself. He could carry blankets, change water, hold Valko steady during bandage checks, and walk the dog 5 careful steps along the hallway before the injured leg trembled. Valko never turned his back completely on anyone. Even when Reed sat beside him, even when Helen touched him with steady hands, even when sleep pulled his eyelids low, the old dog kept one ear angled toward the door. He slept like a sentry beneath a ruined wall. Mavis Bell arrived on the second afternoon with a pot of soup and a mood that could have disciplined a thunderstorm. She pushed through the clinic door wearing her wine-red coat and a gray knit hat dusted with sleet, carrying the pot in both hands like a sacred offering or a weapon. Reed took it from her before she could drop it on the counter with theatrical suffering. "You look terrible," she told him. "Good to see you too." "I wasn't finished. You look terrible in a very specific way. Like a man who thinks black coffee counts as nutrition." Helen came from the back room, wiping her hands on a towel. "He's been haunting my exam room." "Of course he has. Men like Reed don't visit. They loom." From his blanket, Valko lifted his head. Mavis's face changed before her voice did. The sharpness softened, not into pity, but into recognition. She set her purse down and moved slowly, stopping several feet away from him. "Well," she said, quieter, "there you are, old soldier." Valko watched her. Mavis did not reach for him. She simply removed a small container from her coat pocket and opened it. The smell of roasted chicken drifted through the room. Helen narrowed her eyes. "Mavis." "What?" "He is on a controlled diet." "It's controlled. I controlled it all the way here." Reed looked away before his expression betrayed him. Valko sniffed once. Then, after a long moment, he leaned forward and took the smallest piece from Mavis's fingers. The old woman stood very still. For the first time since Reed had known her, Mavis Bell had no joke ready. That small mercy changed the room. It did not solve anything. It did not bring back Daniel Mercer or explain the blue sedan or scrape the lies from county records. But it proved Valko was not made only of duty and fear. Some buried part of him still knew how to accept a hand that had never betrayed him. Helen turned away and busied herself with the medical cabinet. Reed pretended not to notice. Later that evening, Helen spread papers across the clinic's small break-room table. Reed sat opposite her. Mavis occupied the third chair with the authority of a judge who had brought her own soup. The room was cramped, smelling of old microwave popcorn, antiseptic, and chicken broth. A cork board on one wall held lost pet flyers, vaccination reminders, and a postcard of a cat wearing sunglasses. Beneath that absurd little cat, the first map of something ugly began to form. Helen placed 3 supply invoices in a row. "I didn't remember at first," she said, "but the smell Valko reacted to, the disinfectant, the bandage adhesive, it matched a brand I stopped using years ago. Cheap, harsh. Clinics buy it when budgets are bad or when nobody cares how long the smell stays in a room." Mavis leaned forward. "That sounds like half the county." Helen tapped the first invoice. These were ordered under the name Silver Maples Rest Home. Reed looked at the paper. The name sounded gentle, a place with warm curtains and puzzle tables, a place families would choose because the words made neglect difficult to imagine. "Silver Maples closed," Mavis said slowly. "On paper," Helen replied. 4 years ago. Failed inspection, heating issues, medication storage problems, staffing problems. It was supposed to be shut down and sold. But they're ordering medical supplies. Not consistently, not through normal channels. Small batches, enough to keep something running, not enough to look like a proper facility. Reed studied the invoices. "Who signed?" Helen turned one page around. The signature was not Elias Venz. It belonged to a supply coordinator from one of his shell companies. But Elias's transport service appeared in the billing trail twice under Patient Movement Assistance. Mavis gave a humorless laugh. "Patient movement, that's a tidy little phrase, isn't it? Like they're moving chairs." Helen pulled another folder closer. "I checked old records, not just Valko's. Pets left behind after owners were transferred. A beagle named Rosie. Owner, Carl Whitcomb, Korean War veteran. Cat named Juniper. Owner, Elsie Frey, widow of a Marine. Labrador mix named Buck. Owner, Martin Stowe. All older. All had medical transport paperwork within months of losing contact with local services." Reed felt the pattern build in the air. Not one disappearance. A method. Mavis's voice was low. "I knew Carl. He used to put too much sugar in his coffee and call it patriotism." Helen slid the folder toward Reed. "Their pets didn't move with them. Their families were told care arrangements changed. Some stopped asking after Pike's office confirmed transfers." Reed looked through the papers without touching them too much, as if the pages themselves might bruise. "This isn't proof." "No," Helen said. "It's smoke." "And smoke means fire," Mavis said. "Sometimes," Reed replied. "Sometimes it means someone wants you to run into the wrong room." Helen looked at him with approval she did not bother disguising. "Which is why we don't kick down doors." Mavis snorted. "Shame, I wore my good boots." They began assembling what they could legally gather. Reed photographed the tire tracks at the Mercer farm again in daylight from the public shoulder. He noted tread patterns, distance between wheels, direction of travel. He marked times when the blue sedan crossed near the diner based on Mavis's notes and the dates in her order book. He wrote down the partial plate fragments he remembered, even the ones he doubted, because memory was a treacherous animal but still useful if kept on a short leash. Helen gathered clinic records, supply brands, pet abandonment patterns, and old inspection notes for Silver Maples. She was careful to separate fact from suspicion. She labeled everything. She made copies. She scanned copies of copies and stored them in places Reed did not ask about. Mavis called families. That was the hardest work. Not because dialing numbers was difficult, but because each call required her to lift a lid someone had nailed shut. Reed heard pieces of the conversations from the clinic hallway. "Did your father write after the transfer?" "No, honey, I'm not accusing you." "Yes, I remember, Elsie. Of course I remember, Elsie." "Did Pike's office tell you that?" "No, I don't know anything for sure. That's why I'm asking." Sometimes Mavis hung up and stared at the wall. Sometimes she cursed softly. Once she took off her glasses and wiped them for a full minute, though they were not dirty. Reed did not comfort her. He suspected she would have thrown soup at him if he tried. By the fourth night, Deputy Clara Haynes entered the clinic through the back door. She came without her cruiser, without uniform. In a dark hoodie under a denim jacket lined with shearling, her blunt dark hair tucked under a navy knit cap. She looked younger outside the sheriff's office, but not less serious. A black notebook with a red elastic band was tucked under one arm. Helen locked the door behind her. Clara did not sit. "If Pike asks," she said, "I was never here." Mavis folded her arms. "If Pike asks me anything before coffee, I'll make him regret his childhood." Clara blinked. Reed said, "She means hello." "I assumed." The deputy opened her notebook and placed 2 printed vehicle records on the table. "Public databases," she said. "Nothing restricted. The blue sedan is registered to a company called Northline Patient Logistics. Northline is tied to Venn Care Transit through a leasing agreement." "Caleb Dorsey drives it?" Reed asked. "Unofficially. His name appears on fuel receipts and maintenance logs, not on formal driver filings." Clara tapped the second sheet. "He's useful because he's invisible in the right places." Helen looked over the records. "And the white ambulance?" "Not registered as an ambulance anymore. Retired vehicle. Bought at auction through another company connected to Elias Venn. It should not be transporting patients." Mavis's face darkened. Clara continued, "There's more. Property transfers for several elderly residents and veterans were processed by attorney Glenn Wexler." Reed recognized the name from courthouse ads and estate planning notices. A small man with a gold-rimmed smile, always appearing in local papers beside phrases like legacy care and trusted counsel. Clara placed another sheet down. Power of attorney documents, care agreements, debt settlements. They look legal. Too legal. Helen frowned. "Meaning?" "Same notary on too many forms. Signatures dated on days when medical transport logs show the person supposedly signing was out of county. Repeated language across unrelated cases." Clara's jaw tightened. "It's a machine. Small enough not to draw state attention. Local enough that families trusted the names." Reed looked at her. "Why bring this now?" Clara's fingers rested on the red band around her notebook. "Because Pike told me this morning to stop reviewing Venn-related logs." No one spoke. "And because he didn't ask what I found first." That was the moment the room changed. It was not a shout, not a gunshot, not Valko barking at a door. It was a young deputy admitting that the man above her had feared the question before hearing it. Mavis sat back slowly. Helen's eyes moved toward Reed. Reed felt the old machinery inside him align, not combat, not revenge. Something colder and more durable. Procedure. "You willing to send this up?" he asked Clara. "I'm willing to prepare it," she said. "But if we send half-formed suspicion, Pike buries me, Venn changes routes, and anyone inside Silver Maples gets moved." "Then we need eyes on Silver Maples," Reed said. "From public ground," Helen added before he could continue. Reed looked at her. She raised an eyebrow. "Don't make me repeat myself like you're a Labrador." So they went, not as a raid, not as heroes, not even as trespassers. Just Reed, Helen, and Valko in the truck, with Clara's records folded in Reed's inside pocket and Mavis's notes photographed on his phone. Mavis wanted to come, but Helen threatened to sedate her, and Mavis said she'd like to see Helen try. In the end, Mavis stayed behind to make calls, which was how she described commanding an army from a diner booth. Silver Maple's rest home sat beyond a line of pines east of town, where the road narrowed and the ditches deepened. The sign near the turnoff had rotted around the edges. A painted silver maple leaf hung crooked beneath the name, its once cheerful letters peeling into strips. The front drive was chained, the main building looked dead. Dark windows, empty porch, no porch lights, no visible staff cars. Snow gathered untouched across the front steps. A place closed exactly as the paperwork claimed. Reed drove past without slowing, then turned onto the county road that curved around the back property line. Helen sat beside him, tense but quiet. In the rear, Valko lay on a padded blanket. He had been calm for most of the ride, breathing slow, one paw tucked beneath him. Then they reached the rear access road. Valko lifted his head. The sound that came from him was not loud. It was worse than loud, a thin, broken vibration that seemed to come from memory rather than throat. Reed pulled over on the public shoulder beneath a stand of bare trees. Through the branches, they could see the rear of Silver Maples. A faint light glowed behind a covered service entrance. Smoke rose from a side chimney, pale against the dark sky. Under a long metal awning sat a white ambulance-shaped van with no markings on the doors. Helen whispered, "Closed facilities don't heat wings." Reed said nothing. He photographed the van from inside the truck. No flash. He zoomed in on the tire tread, on the dark shape of a loading ramp, on a stack of supply crates near the door, half covered by a tarp. Valko began to struggle. Helen turned in her seat. "No, Valko, easy." The dog pushed his front paws under him, weak muscles shaking. His eyes fixed on the building, ears forward, mouth parted in a soundless effort to breathe through the scent. Reed reached back, steadying him with one hand. "I know," he said softly. Valko trembled harder. Then, from somewhere behind the building, there came a cough. Human. Weak. A pause. Another cough. Reed's hand tightened on the seat. Helen's face went pale in the dashboard glow. The sound came again, followed by a voice so faint the wind almost took it. "Valko." The old dog lost what little control he had. He surged toward the door with a desperate strength that lasted only a second. Helen caught the blanket around his chest. Reed twisted back, bracing him, holding him before he could hurt himself. Valko's claws scraped the seat. His throat opened in a hoarse, broken bark that seemed to tear him apart. "Reed," Helen said, and her voice was sharp now. "Don't." He was already looking toward the building. The old instinct had risen in him. Immediate, physical, merciless. Someone inside. Someone who knew the dog. Someone sick enough that even a cough sounded like a match about to go out. Every part of Reed trained by war told him to move. Helen put a hand on his arm. "If we go in now," she said, "we give Ven a reason to move them. We give Pike a reason to call this trespassing. We give a judge a reason to throw out anything we find." Reed stared through the trees. The voice did not come again. Valko shook beneath his hands, eyes bright with pain and fury and recognition. Helen's voice softened, but it did not weaken. "Courage isn't always entering the building. Sometimes it's not entering until the door can stay open after you leave." That landed harder than Reed wanted it to. He had spent much of his life measuring bravery by movement: advance, breach, retrieve, extract. But this was not a battlefield where speed alone saved lives. This was a county where paperwork had become a locked room, and if he broke the wrong window too soon, the people inside might vanish into another dark place with cleaner forms. Reed slowly released a breath. He looked at Valko. "We heard him," he said, though he did not know whether the promise was for the dog or himself. "We heard him." Valko did not calm, not fully. But the words reached him enough that his body sagged back against the blanket, exhausted by the brief rebellion of hope. Reed took 3 more photographs. Helen recorded a short video from the passenger seat, capturing the heated chimney, the unmarked van, the supply crates, and the dark rear entrance where Silver Maples breathed like something pretending to be dead. Then Reed drove away. Every foot of distance felt like betrayal. Back at the clinic, Clara was waiting in the break room with her notebook open and her face set. Reed placed the phone on the table and played the video. Helen added the supply invoices. Mavis, called in from the diner, arrived 20 minutes later with wet boots, red cheeks, and a list of families who had heard the words Silver Maples but had never been given an address. Clara watched everything without interrupting. When the video ended, she closed her notebook. "I'll send it to state investigators," she said. Mavis looked at her. "Tonight?" Clara nodded. "Tonight. You'll lose your job." "Maybe." "Pike will come after you." "Probably." Reed watched Clara's hands. They trembled once before she pressed them flat against the table. "I became a deputy because my father believed badges should make scared people less scared," she said. "I don't know what Pike believes anymore." No one offered comfort. The room had no use for soft lies. Clara gathered the copies, the photographs, the vehicle records, the invoice scans, and Helen's notes. Reed walked her to the back door. At the threshold, Clara looked past him toward Valko, asleep again near the exam room, his bandaged leg stretched out, paws twitching in dreams that still made him run. "He knows someone in there," Clara said. "Yes." "Then we'd better be right." Reed looked at the old dog. "No," he said. "We'd better be careful enough that being right matters." Clara left through the sleet, carrying the first true weight of the case beneath her jacket. Inside, Helen dimmed the clinic lights. Mavis washed bowls in the small sink, despite no one asking. Reed sat on the floor beside Valko, one hand resting near the dog's shoulder, close enough to be found if needed. Valko slept, but not peacefully. His legs moved beneath the blanket, slower now, as if the chase had changed. He was no longer running after the blue sedan on the highway. He was moving through some dark corridor Reed could not yet enter. The mission had shifted. The trail was no longer just scent, road, and memory. Now it had names, vehicles, invoices, a closed facility with smoke in its chimney, a voice in the dark that knew Valko well enough to call him home. Reed sat with that knowledge until the clock passed midnight and the clinic settled around them like a guarded chapel. Some missions did not end when the body stopped moving. Some waited in the bones, patient as winter, until someone finally listened. Cedar Rail County did not crack open all at once. It began with phone calls. Mavis Bell made most of them from the back booth of her diner where the vinyl seat was split, the window steamed at the edges, and the lunch crowd knew better than to interrupt when she had her blue order book open. She called daughters who had not heard from fathers, nephews who had stopped asking questions because every answer came on official letterhead, widows who had been told their brothers were receiving improved care out of county. Some hung up on her, some cried before she finished the second sentence. Some went silent so long that Mavis checked the line and said, "Honey, if you're still breathing, tap the phone." Reed sat across from her through part of it, listening to the shape of grief without hearing every word. There were different kinds. Anger came fast and hot. Shame came softer. Shame whispered. Shame made people say things like, "I thought I was doing the right thing." And the sheriff's office said everything was handled, and he signed the papers himself, didn't he? By the end of the second day, Mavis had a list. Not proof, not yet. But names. Names were harder to bury than rumors. At Helen Rourke's clinic, Clara Haynes sent the first packet to state investigators through a channel she trusted more than the sheriff's office and less than God. She did it after midnight, seated at the clinic break room table with Reed, Helen, and a cooling mug of Mavis's soup nearby. Clara's face looked pale in the light from the laptop. She did not tremble when she hit send, but she did not breathe normally for several seconds afterward either. "Now what?" Helen asked. "Now they verify," Clara said, "and because weather is about to turn ugly, they'll be slow." Reed looked toward the window. Snow had begun again, thin at first, almost polite. The forecast said worse by evening. Clara closed the laptop. "If Pike knows I sent that, I'm done." Mavis, who had fallen asleep in a chair 10 minutes earlier and denied it with her eyes closed, muttered, "Good. Maybe then you can get a job where your boss doesn't smell like polished cowardice." Clara blinked. "Does she always wake up insulting people?" Helen said, "Only when she likes them." In the exam room, Valko slept under a blanket near the heater. His injured leg had begun to mend, but healing did not make him gentle. It made him watchful. He ate more now, accepted water from Reed's hand, and allowed Helen to change his bandages without bracing for betrayal every time. Yet whenever a vehicle slowed outside the clinic, his ears rose. Whenever the wind carried diesel fumes through the old door seals, his eyes opened. The dog was recovering. The mission inside him was not. By late afternoon, Reed found the first sign that Elias Venn knew someone was looking. Caleb Dorsey returned to the abandoned gas station. Reed had gone there alone, not to confront him, only to check whether the blue sedan still passed the place where everything had begun. He parked behind the old service bay, where weeds had grown through the cracked concrete and a faded soda sign swung by one rusted hinge. The sedan rolled in just before dusk. Caleb got out with a rag and a bottle of water. His nylon jacket was zipped to his chin, cap pulled low, shoulders hunched against the sleet. He moved around the rear of the sedan and began wiping mud from the license plate, muttering to himself. Reed watched from the shadow of the service bay and recorded with his phone. Caleb's hands shook. He took a call after a minute, turning away from the road. "I told you I tried to shake him," Caleb said. His voice carried in the cold, thin and ragged. "No, not Callahan. The dog. The dog's still alive." Reed's fingers tightened around the phone. Caleb listened, then glanced toward the highway as if expecting Valko to rise from the slush like judgment with teeth. "I know what it means," he said. "If that old man sees him, he'll know. Mercer will know." A pause. "No, I'm not going back in there tonight unless Porter's on shift. She at least keeps them quiet." Another pause. Caleb's voice dropped. "Venn said move-up may happen early if State gets nosy." Reed kept recording until Caleb ended the call, kicked snow against the tires, and drove away too fast. He did not follow. Following a frightened man was easy. Following the people who frightened him required patience. By the time Reed returned to the clinic, Helen had already heard from Clara. Pike had asked who accessed the county transport inquiry portal. Not accusing yet. Fishing. "They know something moved," Clara said over the phone. Reed put Caleb's recording on the break room table and played it once. No one interrupted. When Caleb said, "Mercer will know," Mavis's face went still. Helen closed her eyes for one breath and opened them with a different expression. Not surprise, not triumph. Confirmation had a cruel way of arriving, dressed as dread. "He said Porter," Helen murmured. "You know her?" Reed asked. "Nurse Porter Vale. She worked county elder care before Silver Maples closed." Helen leaned back against the counter, arms folded. 51, maybe. Tired eyes, always smelled like hand soap. She came to 2 continuing care workshops years ago and asked too many questions about minimum staffing requirements. Good questions? Defensive ones? Mavis snorted, meaning she knew the floor was rotten and wanted to know how much carpet would cover it. Helen did not argue. "She's not Elias," Helen said, "but she's been there long enough to know what's happening." Clara, on speaker, was quiet for a moment. "If Porter is the one inside tonight, she may be the weak hinge." "Or the hinge that screams when opened," Reed said. The snow thickened by dark. It came sideways now, whitening the roads and making every street lamp glow inside its own little storm. Cedar Rail County began closing itself, shops locking early, families calling children indoors, Pike's office likely telling itself the roads were too bad for trouble. Trouble, Reed knew, preferred weather like this. Helen insisted on coming. Reed did not waste time trying to forbid her. He had known enough stubborn people to recognize when an argument was just a ceremony before the inevitable. She packed a medical bag, extra gloves, a flashlight, and 2 emergency blankets. Valko tried to stand when he saw the bag. "No," Helen said immediately. The old dog stared at her. "No," she repeated, pointing at him as if addressing a disobedient officer. "You are not storming a possibly illegal care facility on one good leg and righteous indignation." Valko's tail thumped once. Mavis crossed herself with a soup spoon. "Lord help us, the dog has Reed's personality." Reed crouched beside Valko, the dog's amber eyes fixed on him, fierce and pleading in equal measure. Reed placed a hand near his shoulder. "We're going to listen," he said. "Not run. Not yet." Valko breathed through his nose, catching whatever truth lived behind Reed's words. He did not calm completely, but he lowered himself back onto the blanket. That was the chapter's quiet bargain. The dog would stay, and Reed would not pretend the staying was easy. Reed and Helen left by the side door while Mavis remained with Valko, armed with soup, towels, and the clinic phone. Clara could not come without exposing herself, but she kept her radio on and promised to call state investigators again if Reed reported active movement. They drove toward Silver Maples without headlights for the last 100 yards, using the pale spill of snow and memory of the road. Reed parked beyond the curve where the public shoulder widened near the pines. The front of Silver Maples remained dead. The back was not. The chimney breathed. A pale light glowed behind the service entrance. The unmarked ambulance van sat beneath the awning, rear doors closed. Beside it, 2 plastic bins of medical waste leaned against the wall. Snow had been cleared from a narrow path leading to the loading door. Reed photographed everything. Helen recorded video. Then they heard the cry. It was not the same voice as before, not the faint call of Valko's name. This was sharper, panicked, and followed by a heavy thud from inside the service entrance. "Help! Somebody!" The voice cut off. Reed and Helen looked at each other. This was no longer surveillance. A life in immediate distress changed the law, the ethics, and the shape of the night. They ran. Reed reached the loading door first. It was not fully latched. From inside came the smell of disinfectant, old heat, and human fear left too long in fabric. Helen was behind him with the medical bag. "Announce," she whispered. Reed pushed the door open with his shoulder. "Medical help," he called. Someone called for help. A narrow service hall stretched ahead, lit by one flickering strip light. The floor was old linoleum, curled at the seams. A laundry cart blocked part of the passage. Somewhere deeper in the building, a television murmured to no one. An elderly man lay on the floor near a supply closet. He was thin, wearing a pale pajama shirt and socks with no shoes. One hand clawed weakly at the linoleum. His breathing came fast and shallow. Helen was on her knees beside him before Reed finished scanning the hall. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked. The man's lips moved. Reed checked the hallway. No immediate staff, no alarm, no footsteps yet. Helen looked up. He may have fallen trying to get to the door. Pulse is fast. He's cold. Can we move him? Not until I check his hip. A door opened down the corridor. A woman stepped out in faded blue scrubs and a gray cardigan, a ring of keys hanging heavy at her waist. Nurse Porter Vale had the weary posture of someone who had spent years telling herself fatigue was the same as innocence. Her blonde-gray hair was pulled into a low bun. Her face tightened when she saw Helen. Dr. Rourke? Helen did not stop checking the old man. Porter, he needs care. You shouldn't be here. He called for help. Porter's eyes flicked to Reed, then to the open service door. Reed saw fear in her, not shock. Fear. She knew exactly why strangers at the door were dangerous. This is a closed facility, Reed said. Porter swallowed. It's temporary overflow. From where? She did not answer. The old man groaned. Helen's voice cut through the air. Argue later. Get me a blanket and tell me what medication he's on. Porter hesitated only a second before moving. That second told Reed almost as much as the obedience that followed. She was not loyal all the way down. She was trapped in the middle, with enough conscience left to make her miserable. While Helen stabilized the fallen man, Reed moved farther down the hall. He did not kick doors open. He looked through small windows, read posted sheets, took photographs where he could. Beds lined dim rooms. Some held sleeping bodies under thin blankets. Some patients stared without focusing. Medication carts stood with labels half peeled away. A clipboard near the nurse's station listed patients by initials and numbers rather than full names. Not residents. Inventory. At the nurse's station, a printed transfer list lay half covered by a magazine. Reed photographed it quickly. Several names were coded. One line read, DM, Room 12, hold until transport. His throat tightened. Room 12 sat at the end of the corridor. The hall seemed longer than it should have. Buildings like this played tricks. They made 10 doors feel like a pilgrimage. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Somewhere behind him, Helen spoke firmly to Porter. Somewhere outside, snow scratched the building with 1,000 small fingers. Reed reached the last room. The door was partly open. Inside, an old man lay propped against a thin pillow beneath a gray blanket. He was gaunt, his face hollowed by illness and neglect, silver hair cropped unevenly, a rough beard shadowing his jaw. But his eyes were open, pale blue-gray, alert. A man could be weakened, Reed thought, and still not be defeated. The old man looked toward the doorway. For 1 second, neither of them spoke. Then Reed said, Daniel Mercer? The man's breath caught, not fear, recognition of being named. Reed stepped inside slowly, keeping his hands visible. My name is Reed Callahan. I found Valko. Daniel's face changed as if something inside him broke and lit at the same time. Valko, he whispered. He's alive. Daniel closed his eyes. Tears slid into the deep lines at his temples. No, he said, so softly Reed almost missed it. No, they told me. He's alive, Reed repeated. Hurt, starved, but alive. Daniel pressed one shaking hand against his mouth. A sound escaped him, small and wrecked. It was not dramatic. It was the sound of a man losing in an instant the only certainty that had protected him from hope. Reed pulled the chair closer and sat just enough to make his body less threatening, not enough to stay long. I don't have much time, he said. I need to know what happened. Daniel opened his eyes. The room smelled of old medicine, damp wool, and something bitter beneath it. On the nightstand sat a plastic cup, a cracked pair of glasses, and a folded napkin. Someone had used as a bookmark in a patient rights pamphlet no one had meant him to read. Daniel swallowed. I found the papers, he said. Not all. Enough. What papers? Power of attorney, care agreements, property transfers. Veterans' benefits rerouted through care accounts. His voice rasped. I was a medic. People trusted me with pill bottles. I noticed names. Doses wrong. Men sedated who shouldn't be. Women transferred without family calls. Elias Venn? Daniel's eyes hardened. He smiled when he came to the house. A pause. Good coat. Clean shoes. Said Marianne needed stable care. Said Lydia was overwhelmed. Said we could sign temporary authorization. Did you? I refused. Daniel's hand curled in the blanket. Lydia signed later. They told her they'd move Marianne out of state if she didn't. Told her my benefits wouldn't cover care. Told her debt could become neglect charges. Reed absorbed it. A cage made not of bars, but of forms and threats. Where is Lydia? Daniel shut his eyes. They took her to another facility. Work placement, they called it. Debt offset. The words came with shame he had not earned. She thought if she worked, they'd keep us together. She thought she was saving us. And Marianne? Daniel did not answer at first. Reed waited. The silence became its own grave. She died here, Daniel said finally. Not all at once. That would have been kinder. Reed looked down. There were cruelties not worth decorating with detail. The fact was enough. The sorrow needed no embroidery. Daniel's voice thinned. Valko tried to stop them the night they came. He put himself between the door and the men. They used a dart. I heard him hit the porch. I heard him bark once after they carried me out. Then nothing. He looked at Reed with sudden intensity. I thought he died calling for me. He didn't. Daniel breathed like the words hurt. From the hall came Helen's voice, sharper now. Porter's answering voice, lower, frightened. Time was narrowing. Reed took out his phone. Daniel, can I record you? Daniel nodded. Reed started the recording. Daniel gave only fragments, names, dates, the blue sedan, the unmarked ambulance. Yabay? Elias Venn's voice saying the papers were signed. Glenn Wexler's office on the second floor above the bank. Porter Vale bringing pills and avoiding his eyes. A transfer planned before the next inspection. Snow coming. Roads closing. People to be moved before state questions arrived. He did not explain everything. He did not have everything. He had pain, memory, and enough truth to point the blade. Then Daniel gripped Reed's wrist with surprising strength. They'll move us tonight or tomorrow, he said. If they scatter us, you won't find everyone. Elias keeps 2 routes. Bridge Road if weather holds. Old Mill Road if it doesn't. Reed leaned closer. Who else is here? Daniel turned his head toward the corridor. Too many. The words were barely breath. Footsteps sounded near the hall. Porter appeared at the door, face drained of color. You need to go. Helen came up behind her, medical bag in hand. Her expression told Reed she had seen enough to never sleep the same way again. Now, Porter said, and for the first time she sounded less like a guard and more like a woman standing under a roof about to fall. Venn's man checks the rear entrance every hour. If he finds you, everyone here gets moved before morning. Reed stood. Daniel's eyes followed him, terrified by departure in a way that cut deeper than accusation. Reed reached into his pocket and took out the old handkerchief with LM stitched in the corner, sealed in its protective bag. He held it up just long enough for Daniel to see. We found this at the farm. Daniel's face folded. Lydia made that, he whispered. We're looking for her. Daniel nodded, but tears came again. Tell Valko. His voice broke. Reed waited. Daniel tried again. Tell him he did right. Reed could not trust his own voice for a second. Then he said, You can tell him yourself. Daniel looked at him as if that promise were almost too large to survive believing. Reed left the room before Hope could ask too much of him. In the hall, Porter handed Helen a folded sheet torn from a clipboard. Names, Porter whispered. Not all, the ones I know. Helen stared at her. Porter's mouth twisted. Don't thank me. I waited too long. No argument, Helen said. taking the paper. They exited through the service door into a wall of snow. The cold hit Reed hard, not enough to clear the smell of the building from his lungs. He and Helen moved quickly back to the truck, neither speaking until they were on the county road and silver maples had vanished behind the trees. Helen held the folded list in both hands. Reed drove with his jaw locked. "What did Daniel say?" she asked. "Enough. That's not an answer. It's the only one I can say without turning around." Helen looked at him, then said nothing. At the clinic, Valko was awake before Reed opened the door. Mavis stood beside him, one hand on his blanket, eyes sharp with worry. "Well?" Reed did not answer immediately. He removed a small piece of cloth from a sealed bag, a scrap from the blanket near Daniel's bed, taken with permission from the room only because Daniel had pressed it into his hand before Reed left. It carried no legal weight. It carried something older. He knelt in front of Valko and held it out. The dog leaned forward. One breath, then another. His whole body began to shake, not with fear this time, not exactly. His amber eyes lifted to Reed's face. The old dog made a sound so soft it barely existed, then lowered his head onto Reed's hand. Mavis covered her mouth. Helen turned away. Reed kept still, because some moments were not meant to be managed. They were meant to be survived. No one needed to translate. Valko knew. Daniel Mercer was alive. And this time, when the trail continued into the dark, Valko would not have to follow it alone. By nightfall, Cedar Rail County had become a white room with no exits. Snow drove across the roads in hard slanting sheets, erasing ditches, softening mailboxes into lumps, turning every porch light into a small, blurred moon. The wind moved through the dead cornfields with a sound like dry bones being shaken in a sack. Even the old highway seemed to lower its head beneath the storm. Inside Helen Rourke's clinic, no one pretended they were waiting calmly. Clara Haynes had called twice in 20 minutes. Her voice, usually measured, had gone thin around the edges. "The state unit has the packet," she said over speakerphone. "They're moving, but the roads east of Merrow Creek are half closed. Dispatch says they'll be delayed." Reed stood by the exam table, one hand resting near Valko's shoulder. The old German shepherd was awake, his ears forward, amber eyes fixed on the clinic door. He had not seen silver maples that night. He had not heard the radio, but he knew the room had changed. Dogs like Valko read fear before humans gave it language. Helen zipped her medical bag with more force than necessary. How delayed? Long enough for Venn to move people if he knows. Mavis Bell stood near the small sink, wearing her wine-red coat over her diner dress, her blue order book clutched in one hand and a phone in the other. "He knows," she said. "Men like Elias don't wait for proof. They smell consequences like rats smell grain." Clara went quiet, then said, "Caleb's sedan left Venn's garage 17 minutes ago. The unmarked ambulance followed. Porter's last message to Helen said they were loading patients early." Helen looked at Reed. That was the consequence of entering Silver Maples. They had saved a man from the floor. They had found Daniel Mercer. They had captured enough truth to send it upward. And now Elias Venn was doing what men like him always did when light touched the corner of their machinery. He was moving the vulnerable before the light reached the center. Reed turned to the county map Helen had taped to the cabinet door. 2 routes out of Cedar Rail. Old Mill Road, narrow and prone to flooding, already iced over near the creek. Bridge Road, which crossed the low river at Harrow Bridge before meeting the state route. Daniel had warned them. Bridge Road if weather holds, Old Mill Road if it doesn't. Reed traced the line with his finger. "They'll use Harrow Bridge." Helen's eyes narrowed. "You're sure?" "Elias wants speed. Caleb's nervous. They'll take the road they know can carry the van." Mavis was already dialing. "Then people need to see it." "Mavis," Helen warned. "Don't Mavis me. I spent 2 days calling daughters and sons who were told their fathers became paperwork. They don't need permission to stand on a public road." "No one blocks the bridge except me," Reed said. Mavis looked at him. There it is. The heroic stupidity finally made an appearance. "It isn't heroic. It's delay." Clara's voice came through the phone. "If you stop them, Pike will respond." "I'm counting on it." "Reed, if Pike shows up, he has to choose in front of witnesses." That silenced the room. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the clinic windows. Valko pushed himself up. Helen turned. "No." The dog stood anyway. Not well. His injured hind leg trembled almost immediately. His ribs still showed beneath the cleaner yellow and black coat. The old collar with the scraped plate hung at his neck beside the temporary lead Reed had clipped on for short walks. His left ear, nicked in a small V, angled toward the door. Reed crouched in front of him. "You don't have to go." Valko stared at him. There was no pleading in the dog's face now. No panic, only a terrible steadiness. Mavis swallowed. "He knows." Helen's voice came softer. "He's not strong enough." "No," Reed said. "He isn't." Valko stepped forward once, nearly stumbled, and caught himself. Reed closed his eyes for half a second. The choice before him was cruel because both sides were the face of care. Leave Valko safe and betray the one thing that had kept him alive. Bring him and risk asking too much from a body already spent. Reed opened his eyes. "All right," he said quietly, "but you stay with me. No running, no charging. We stand, that's all." Valko leaned his head into Reed's chest just once. Not affection exactly. Agreement? They left in 2 vehicles. Reed drove the pickup with Valko in the back seat, wrapped in a blanket, the leash secured, but loose enough not to frighten him. Helen rode beside Reed with the medical bag, her phone charged, copies of the documents sealed in plastic beneath her coat. Mavis followed in her old station wagon, calling families as she drove, commanding grief through the storm like a general with bad knees and perfect aim. Clara remained in uniform and in danger. She updated the state unit from a side channel, then drove her cruiser toward the bridge under the official excuse of weather patrol. She did not know whether Pike was listening. She assumed he was. Harrow Bridge appeared out of the snow like an old animal crouched over the river. It was a narrow iron and wood bridge from another century, barely wide enough for 2 careful vehicles in good weather, and unfit for any kind of mercy in bad. Beneath it, the river moved black and swollen between ice-fringed banks. On either side, frozen cornfields stretched out white and empty. Reed parked the pickup at the townside entrance, angled enough to block passage but leave room for emergency vehicles. He left the hazard lights flashing. Amber pulses moved over the snow, over the railings, over Valko's eyes in the rearview mirror. Helen stepped out and pulled her hood tight. "This is insane," she said. "Yes?" "I hate that you agree so calmly." Mavis's wagon rolled up behind them, followed by 2 more cars, then a farm truck, then a minivan with one headlight dim. People emerged into the storm in coats thrown over pajamas, boots unlaced, faces pale with cold and old dread. They were not a mob. Mavis had made sure of that. They carried no signs, no weapons, no appetite for spectacle. They carried names. Carl Whitcomb's daughter, Elsie Frey's nephew, Martin Stowe's sister. Others who had spent months telling themselves official explanations were kinder than suspicion. Mavis moved among them, small and round in her red coat, her voice cutting through the wind. "No one touches anyone. No one yells unless I yell first, and I have earned the right. You stand where Helen tells you. You keep your phones ready. You remember why you came." A frightened man in a farm jacket asked, "What if Sheriff Pike says we're interfering?" Mavis looked at him. "Then you ask him why seeing your father is interference." Headlights appeared beyond the curve. First the dark blue sedan, then the white ambulance-shaped van. They slowed when the bridge came into view. The sedan stopped 30 feet from Reed's pickup. Caleb Dorsey sat behind the wheel, face washed pale by dashboard light. Even through the snow-streaked windshield, Reed could see his mouth moving as he spoke into a phone. The van idled behind him. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the rear door of the sedan opened. Elias Venn stepped out into the storm wearing a charcoal wool coat that had no business looking expensive in such weather. Snow collected on his silver hair and dark shoulders. His black leather gloves were immaculate. Even now, even here, he carried himself like a man inconvenienced by lesser people. He walked forward until the flashing amber lights touched his face. "Mr. Callahan," Elias said, "move your vehicle." His voice was controlled, polite, the kind of voice that had coaxed signatures from frightened families. Reed stood beside the truck. "No, this is a medical transport." "Then show the transfer orders." Elias smiled faintly. "You have no authority to request them." Helen lifted her phone, already recording. "I do have authority to document what happens on a public road." Elias's smile thinned. Behind Reed, Mavis's group grew quieter. Their phones were out now, small rectangles of light trembling in gloved hands. The van's engine rumbled. From inside came a weak thud. Then another. Valko heard it. Reed felt the leash tighten before he turned. The dog had climbed down from the truck, not jumped, not lunged, climbed, painfully, stubbornly, with one paw finding the snowy road, then another. His hind legs shook. His body was thin beneath the blanket Helen had thrown over him. But he stood. Elias looked at the dog. For the first time, something like fear crossed his clean face. "Get that animal back in the truck," he said. Valko stepped forward. Reed moved with him, not in front, not behind, beside. The old German shepherd walked into the beams of the van's headlights. Snow swirled around him. His black saddle and yellow coat glowed in harsh fragments. The scraped metal plate at his collar flashed once. He stopped directly before the van, small against the vehicle, fragile against its weight. Yet the entire bridge seemed to arrange itself around him. No one spoke. The dog who had been cursed at on the highway, fed scraps behind a diner, sedated, abandoned, starved, and nearly erased, now stood where every paper lie in Cedar Rail County had to face him. Elias turned sharply toward Caleb. "Back up!" Caleb did not move. "Back up!" Elias snapped. The van driver honked once, a short, anxious blast. Valko did not flinch. Reed laid one hand lightly on the dog's back and faced Elias. "That dog ran farther on broken legs than any of you ever walked for the truth." The words did not echo. The storm swallowed echoes. But everyone heard them. Then Sheriff Nolan Pike arrived. His cruiser slid to a stop near Mavis's wagon, lights flashing red and blue through the snow. Pike stepped out in his brown sheriff coat, hat pulled low, one hand near his belt. His badge shone wetly beneath the bridge lights. "What the hell is this?" Pike shouted. Mavis answered before Reed could. "Looks like a county road, Nolan. Try not to arrest the weather." "Mavis, get these people back." No. Pike's eyes swept over the families, Helen's phone, Reed, Valko, Elias. His face shifted as he understood the shape of the trap. Not physical, moral. He turned to Reed. "Move your truck." "Open the van." "This is lawful medical transport." "Then open it." Pike's jaw worked. His thumb went to his badge, rubbing the edge as if the metal might tell him who he used to be. Elias stepped closer to him. "Sheriff, control this." That was a mistake, not because Pike was brave, because Elias said it like ownership. Clara's cruiser appeared behind Pike's, sliding carefully through the snow. She stepped out in full deputy uniform, a waterproof folder tucked beneath one arm. Her face was pale, but she walked steadily. "Sheriff," she called. State investigators have the packet. They're en route. Dispatch logged it. Pike turned on her. Deputy, and I have confirmation that the white vehicle is not licensed for patient transport, Clara continued, voice louder now. I also have probable cause documentation involving Silver Maple's rest home. Elias's composure cracked. This is absurd. From inside the van, a voice cried out, not loudly, but clearly enough. Daniel! A woman in the crowd broke into sobs. Someone else shouted a name. Helen moved toward the van. Pike grabbed her arm. Reed was there in one step. He did not touch Pike. He did not need to. Let her go. For one long second, the sheriff and the former SEAL stood facing each other while the storm spun around them. Then Pike released Helen. Clara moved to the rear of the van. Open it! Caleb stumbled from the sedan, hands raised halfway. I don't have the key. Ven has... Elias turned toward him with a look sharp enough to cut skin. Caleb broke. He has it. He said we had to move them before morning. The crowd heard. Pike heard. The bridge heard. Elias reached into his coat, but Clara drew her weapon and held it steady, aimed low but unmistakable. Hands where I can see them. For the first time that night, Elias Ven looked like an ordinary old man in an expensive coat standing too far from shelter. Slowly he raised his hands. Helen took the keys from his pocket with gloved fingers and opened the rear doors. The smell came first. Stale heat, antiseptic, fear, and too many bodies in too small a space. Inside were beds locked in transport brackets, blankets thin over trembling shapes. Elderly men and women blinked into the stormlight. Some were confused. Some cried. Some reached toward voices calling their names. Mavis moved forward, order book open, tears freezing on her cheeks. Carl Whitcomb, she called. Is Carl here? A weak hand lifted. Carl's daughter made a sound like a child and pushed past Mavis until Helen caught her and guided her carefully. Slowly, Helen said, let us get them down safely. Names began to return to the world. Elsie, Martin, Ruth, Bennett, and then Daniel Mercer. He lay on a stretcher near the front of the van, wrapped in a gray blanket, face gaunt but eyes open. When the cold air struck him, he turned his head toward the bridge. Valko heard his breath before anyone said the name. The dog tried to move. His legs failed. Reed caught him under the chest, lowering him gently to the snow rather than letting him fall. Daniel's eyes found the dog. For a moment, the storm vanished from Reed's mind. Daniel reached out one trembling hand from the stretcher. Valko, he whispered. The old dog dragged himself forward half a step, then stopped, shaking too hard to continue. Reed helped him, one arm beneath him, not carrying him away from the effort, but sharing enough of the burden that the effort could succeed. Daniel's fingers touched Valko's head. The dog closed his eyes. There was no triumphant music, no clean victory, only an old man and an old dog touching each other in the snow after a season of lies had tried and failed to make them ghosts. Around them, the bridge filled with human voices. Some wept, some apologized to people too weak to answer. Some stood with hands over mouths, watching the cost of their silence being lowered from the back of a van. State police arrived through the storm minutes later, their lights blue and white against the snow. Real ambulances followed, marked and staffed, their doors opening to clean blankets and trained hands. Clara surrendered her folder to the lead investigator. Caleb Dorsey began talking before anyone asked him twice. Porter Vale's name came up, then Glenn Wexler's, then Silver Maple's. Pike stood apart. His weapon was holstered. His hat was gone, blown somewhere toward the rail. Snow clung to his hair and mustache. He looked smaller without command. When the state investigator asked for his badge, Pike looked at Reed first. Reed gave him nothing. No forgiveness, no performance of hatred. Pike removed the badge with stiff fingers and handed it over. Elias Venn was placed in the back of a state cruiser with his expensive coat still buttoned, his polished shoes wet with bridge slush. He did not look at the families. Men like Elias rarely looked directly at what they had done when the doing was finally given faces. Daniel was loaded into a real ambulance. This one had markings: heat, oxygen, a paramedic who looked him in the eye while speaking. Before the doors closed, Daniel looked toward Reed, then toward Valko. Reed lifted the dog enough for Daniel to see him clearly. "He did right," Reed said. Daniel's mouth trembled. "Yes," he whispered. "He did." The ambulance doors closed. Valko watched as it pulled away, lights turning the snow red, then white, then gone into the storm. He did not strain against Reed's arms this time. He did not bark. He only watched. The chase that had begun on the old highway had reached the bridge and stopped there, not because the road ended, but because the truth had finally caught up with the lie. Reed knelt beside him on the cold planks of Harrow Bridge. Around them, families held one another. Helen worked beside paramedics. Mavis stood with her blue order book pressed to her chest. Clara spoke into her radio with a voice that no longer trembled. Valko leaned his weight against Reed. For days, perhaps for months, the dog had lived for one purpose: follow the scent, find the family, refuse the world's explanation. Now the purpose had been fulfilled. Reed felt the old fear then, the one soldiers knew after the mission ended, and silence came asking who they were without it. He placed his hand on Valko's damp neck. "You're still here," he said. The dog breathed against him, tired beyond measure, but alive. Reed looked down the road where the ambulance had disappeared. The hardest mission, he realized, was not always finding the lost. Sometimes it was teaching the rescued how to live after the road stopped running. Cedar Rail County did not become good overnight. That was the first disappointment, and maybe the first honest mercy. The morning after Harrow Bridge, the snow stopped as if the sky had exhausted itself. The town emerged slowly from white silence, porch lights clicking off, plows growling down side streets, people standing in driveways with shovels held uselessly in their hands. News vans came by noon. State investigators came earlier. They moved through Silver Maples with clipboards, cameras, evidence bags, and the grim efficiency of people trained to give horror a filing number. Elias Venn was held without the dignity he had spent years polishing. Attorney Glenn Wexler's office above the bank was searched. Sheriff Nolan Pike was suspended pending investigation, his photograph removed from the front hallway of the sheriff's office by someone who did not make a ceremony of it. Caleb Dorsey kept talking because fear had finally found a direction. Nurse Porter Vale gave names, schedules, and storage room keys with the face of a woman who understood that confession was not the same as redemption. But none of that fed the people pulled from the van. None of it repaired weak lungs, unpaid bills, missing deeds, or the soft private shame of families who had signed papers they did not understand because a smiling man in a good coat had told them it was love. The town had wanted evil to look like a monster. Instead, it had arrived as a form to be initialed. Reed Callahan watched the aftermath from the edges, where he was most comfortable. He gave his statement. He answered what he had seen. He handed over copies of photographs, recordings, and notes. Then he returned to Helen Rourke's clinic because that was where the living had gathered. Helen's clinic had become part hospital, part waiting room, part confessional booth, and part badly managed soup kitchen. Mavis Bell moved through it with a pot in one hand and judgment in the other. "No, you cannot live on crackers," she told a retired lineman wrapped in a blanket near the heater. "You survived Silver Maples. Don't make me explain nutrition to you like you're a houseplant." The old man blinked at her, then accepted the soup. Helen hadn't slept properly in 2 days. Her dark hair had come loose from its tie, her teal scrubs were hidden beneath a thick cardigan, and her eyes carried the sharp shine of exhaustion. Still, her hands remained steady. She checked blood pressure, changed dressings, called real physicians. argued with insurance representatives until even Reed felt sorry for the representatives. Clara Haynes came and went in a borrowed coat, no longer sure whether she still had a job, but somehow looking more like a deputy than she ever had under Pike's shadow. Families stopped her in the hall to ask questions she could not always answer. She answered the ones she could, and for the rest, she wrote names in her black notebook with the red elastic band. Names mattered now. People were learning that. Daniel Mercer was moved to Helen's clinic for temporary stabilization before a proper care placement could be arranged. He looked smaller in daylight, as if the fluorescent cruelty of silver maples had inflated his suffering and the morning had left only the fragile truth of his body. He lay in the recovery room beneath clean blankets, his silver hair combed by Helen with an irritated tenderness she denied having. "Don't make a fuss," she told him. Daniel's voice was thin. "I wasn't?" "You were thinking about it." Reed stood near the door, listening. Daniel saw him and tried to smile. "Is he here?" Reed did not need to ask who. "He's here." Valko was not supposed to be walking much. Helen had made that clear in several tones, each more threatening than the last. But when Reed opened the recovery room door and the old German shepherd saw Daniel, rules became small things. Valko rose from the blanket in the hall, slowly. His injured hind leg still trembled. His black and yellow coat had been washed and brushed, though patches remained thin from hunger. The old scraped collar hung at his neck, cleaned but not replaced yet. The nameplate caught the light, scars and all. Daniel tried to sit up. Helen put one hand on his shoulder. "No." You need to not fall out of bed and make me invent new swear words." Valko crossed the room one careful step at a time. No one spoke. Even Mavis, standing with a soup ladle near the door, held still. The dog reached the bed, looked up once into Daniel's face, and then placed his head on Daniel's thigh. Daniel folded over him as much as his body allowed. The sound he made was not loud. It did not belong to performance. It was the sound of a man finding the part of himself he had buried because he thought it was dead. "I heard you," Daniel whispered into the dog's fur. "That night, I heard you." Valko closed his eyes. His whole body seemed to exhale. For weeks, maybe months, the dog had been a bowstring pulled to the point of breaking. Now, under Daniel's shaking hand, something inside him finally lowered, not vanished. Scars did not vanish. But the weight shifted. Reed looked away first, not because the moment embarrassed him, but because some reunions deserved a little privacy, even in crowded rooms. Near the hallway, Lydia Mercer arrived just after noon. She came in without drama, which made the sight of her more painful. She was 34, though the months had pressed older shadows beneath her eyes. Her dark blonde hair was tied back carelessly, a silver leaf-shaped clip holding one uneven section near her temple. She wore a borrowed brown coat over a pale sweater, jeans tucked into worn boots, and carried a folder so tightly against her chest that the edges bent. Helen met her at the entrance and spoke softly. Lydia listened. Her face did not break all at once. It changed in pieces, mouth first, then eyes, then the shoulders that had been held too high for too long. When she entered Daniel's room, her father looked at her as if he feared she might be another drugged dream. "Liddy," he said. The folder fell from her hands. She crossed the room and sat beside him, taking his hand carefully, as though illness had turned him to glass. Daniel began apologizing before she could speak. "I should have protected you." Lydia shook her head, tears already moving down her face. "Dad, no. I signed nothing, but I still—" "You kept asking questions," she said. "You and Valko. You kept the truth alive long enough for me to come home." Daniel closed his eyes. Lydia leaned her forehead to his hand, not like a child exactly, but like someone touching the last unburned beam of a house. Reed watched from the doorway with Valko leaning against his leg. The old dog's gaze moved between father and daughter, ears soft now, not guarding against danger, but keeping watch over something more fragile. Hope, Reed thought, was not light. Not at first. At first it was a room where people were afraid to believe the door would stay open. The days that followed did not arrange themselves neatly. Some families demanded answers from anyone with a badge. Some avoided the clinic because guilt made them cowards twice. Some brought casseroles, blankets, spare coats, old photographs, legal documents, and in one case, a three-legged cat whose owner had been found alive in Silver Maples and refused to go anywhere without him. Mavis fed everyone. She claimed she was doing it because hungry people became stupid, and she had enough stupidity to manage already. But Reed saw the way she slipped extra biscuits into napkins for those too ashamed to ask. He saw how she remembered who needed less salt, who had trouble chewing, who cried if offered apple pie because their mother used to make it. Helen coordinated medical care. Clara worked with state investigators not as a hero, but as a witness with clean notes and a spine that had found its final shape. Lydia began sorting papers. At first her hands shook whenever she saw Glenn Wexler's letterhead or Elias Venn's signature block. Then the shaking became anger. Then the anger became order. She built folders for families. She highlighted clauses. She wrote timelines. She sat with people who had been tricked into signing away homes and told them, gently, that shame belonged to the people who used trust as bait. Reed repaired things because broken wood was easier than broken systems. A week after the bridge, he walked through the old house behind Helen's clinic with a flashlight, a crowbar, and Valko limping beside him. The house had once belonged to Helen's uncle, then to no one in particular. Its porch sagged. The back room smelled of dust and mice. The stove coughed smoke the first time Reed tested it. 2 upstairs windows rattled in their frames like loose teeth. "It's awful," Helen said, standing in the doorway. "It has walls. One of them is arguing with gravity. Gravity loses all the time." Mavis entered behind them, carrying a box of donated mugs. She looked around and nodded. "Needs curtains." Helen stared at her. "The roof leaks." "Then it needs buckets and curtains." Daniel, brought over in a wheelchair 2 days later, looked at the place for a long time. Valko stood beside the chair, leaning his shoulder lightly against Daniel's knee. "What do you think?" Reed asked. Daniel's hand rested on Valko's head. "I think it looks like something that survived being neglected." Mavis sniffed. "That's one way to describe bad plumbing." They began with one room. A bed for Daniel near the downstairs window. A heater that worked after Reed threatened it with tools. A shelf for medicine. A hook by the door for Valko's leash. Then a second bed for Carl Whitcomb until his daughter could make room at home. Then a cot for a man named Bennett whose nephew was driving in from Indiana. Then a corner for pet crates because rescued people often came with animals who had been waiting in kennels, barns, neighbors' garages, and memory. No one officially named it. The town did that. Someone brought a hand-painted sign and leaned it against the porch rail. The Rail House. The name stuck because Cedar Rail County was built around tracks that no longer carried passengers, only freight, rust, and the memory of departures. The Rail House sounded like a place where departures could be interrupted. It was not a center, not yet. It was not charity in glossy brochures. It was a drafty house with soup on the stove, medical schedules taped to the refrigerator, donated blankets folded on chairs, and Mavis yelling that if one more person tracked mud across her floor, she would personally return them to Silver Maples for character development. People laughed when she said it. Some laughed too hard. That was allowed. Laughter, Reed learned, could be a splint. One evening, Daniel asked Reed to sit with him on the back porch. The snow had melted from the steps, leaving the yard soft and brown. Valko lay between them, cleaner now, still thin, but less haunted in the shoulders. His new leather collar rested in Reed's hand. Daniel looked at it. "You bought him a new one." "Yes." "Good." Reed turned the collar over. Dark brown leather, strong brass buckle, new tag engraved cleanly. Valko. Beside it lay the old scraped metal plate from the tactical collar, which Reed had cleaned and fitted to hang with the new tag. Daniel touched the scarred plate with 2 fingers. "They tried to take his name. They failed." Daniel nodded, but his eyes were wet. For a long while he watched the dog breathe. Then he said, "I can't keep him." Reed looked at him. Daniel did not look away. That was the bravery left to him now, not running from the truth of his own body. "I want to," he said. "God knows I want to, but wanting isn't care. Lydia is rebuilding from ashes. I can barely stand. Valko needs walks, medicine, someone who can lift him if he falls." His hand moved over the dog's head. "He found me because he loved me. Now he needs someone strong enough to help him live." Reed felt the sentence settle around him like a mantle he had not asked for and could not refuse. "I won't take him from you," he said. Daniel smiled faintly. "No, you'll keep him close enough that I don't have to lose him twice." Valko opened one eye at the sound of Daniel's voice. Reed clipped the new collar around the dog's neck, leaving the old plate beside the new tag. Past and present touched with a small metallic sound. Not erased, carried. Days passed. Valko gained weight in stubborn increments. His coat grew cleaner, the black saddle dark again, the yellow along his legs warming toward honey. The V-shaped notch in his left ear remained, as did the limp. But his eyes changed most. They no longer searched every passing engine as if life depended on pursuit. Sometimes he slept with his back turned to the door. The first time Reed noticed, he sat very still. Trust was not loud when it returned. It arrived like a dog sleeping without guarding the room. On the last morning of the story, though Reed did not know stories could name their own endings, he took Valko back to the old highway. Late winter had thinned. Snow remained only in the ditches and along the shaded edges of the cornfields. The abandoned gas station stood beside the road, rusted pumps facing traffic like tired sentries. The sky was pale blue for once, and the wind carried the smell of wet earth beneath the cold. Reed parked where he had first seen the dog running. He opened the passenger door. Valko stepped down slowly. No blanket now, no desperate chase. The new collar sat against his neck, the old scraped plate clicking softly against the new tag. Reed held the leash, but loosely. He wore the same olive combat shirt beneath his field jacket, the silver in his undercut bright at the temples, his old watch scratched and ticking. For a while, they simply walked along the shoulder. Cars passed. A truck rumbled by, splashing slush from a pothole. Valko's ears lifted, then settled. No panic, no pull, no ruined bark scraped from a starving throat. Just walking. Reed looked down at him. "This is where you found me." Valko kept his gaze forward. Reed corrected himself quietly. "No, where you made me stop." The old dog paused near the bus shelter across from Mavis's diner. For weeks he had waited there like a creature from some old myth, guarding the edge between the known world and the land where the lost had been taken. Now he sniffed the snowbank, found nothing worth chasing, and leaned his shoulder lightly against Reed's leg. Across the road, Mavis stood in the diner window with a coffee pot in one hand. She raised it like a salute. Reed lifted 2 fingers. Valko looked toward the highway, then back toward town. That was all. But it was enough. The road remained the same road, cracked asphalt, old salt stains, dead cornfields, an abandoned gas station, the long gray memory of what had happened there. The world did not kindly erase its worst places. It only offered sometimes the chance to walk through them differently. Once Valko had run here on broken legs after the last cent of the family stolen from him. Now he walked beside a man who had chosen to follow. Not because the road was safe, not because the grief was gone, but because some roads, after witnessing despair, were stubborn enough to become paths home. Reed and Valko turned away from the highway and started back toward town, toward Helen's clinic, toward Daniel waiting by the window, toward Lydia sorting papers at the kitchen table, toward Mavis's soup, Clara's notebook, and a drafty house with a hand-painted sign on the porch. The rail house waited. Not perfect, not finished. Alive. And for the first time in a long while, so were they. Sometimes the road God uses to lead us back to truth does not look holy at first. It may look like a muddy highway, an old dog too tired to run, or one person willing to stop when everyone else keeps driving. Valko's story reminds us that love does not always arrive loud. Sometimes it limps, waits, remembers, and refuses to let the forgotten stay forgotten. And maybe that is the small miracle we are asked to notice in our own lives, the quiet chance to stop, listen, and stand beside someone who can no longer stand alone. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us who Valko reminded you of. And if you want more stories of loyalty, courage, and grace, please subscribe to the channel. May peace find you on the road you are walking, and may you never miss the quiet signs that lead you home.